This morning I thought I would do an update on how my Cattleyas in semi-hydroponics are doing. So I've grown in semi-hydro for Cattleyas for the most part. I don't grow all my orchids in semi-hydroponics, mostly just the Cattleyas, of which I have around 300 to 400 Cattleyas. And I grow them in semi-hydroponics, and I've grown them at least 10 years. I've grown them 10 years in Chicago, and I grew them 3 to 4 years in semi-hydroponics when I lived in Philadelphia. So, you know, I'm running over a dozen years in semi-hydroponics for my Cattleyas. And the reason I use a system for them is because I don't like to water, and I enjoy having the water reservoir at the bottom, and this lets me water them a lot less. And so I'm just really lazy, and of course now my collection is huge, and I really love it in the winter when I generally forget to water a lot, and this just, you know, keeps them moist longer. Now I don't recommend semi-hydroponics for everyone. I call it the lazy person system, and if you read Ray Barcolow's website, you know, he came up with it as a system for keeping his plants alive when he had to go away a lot and give talks and he wasn't home to water them. So, you know, it's not really a system if you want to fuss with your plants and water them all the time and do things to them. You know, it's for being lazy. And so that's why I use it for my Cattleyas. But also Cattleyas like to get really hot, and then they like to dry out between waterings, and semi-hydroponics really allows that to happen, especially if you don't like to water like I don't like to water. So I thought I'd go through some, not all of my Cattleyas, and just talk about how some of them are doing in semi-hydroponics. So right here we have my BL Little Bird, and this I have gotten some best of class awards for. It's growing in a very large cake container. So this is the top of like one of those 15-inch cakes that you buy at the grocery store. And so after we ate the cake, the kids loved it. They were like, "Oh Mom, you needed a new container for your orchids, so we have to have cake." So yeah, they got cake, and then I got the top from the cake container afterwards. And I went with this large container because I wanted to grow a specimen sized plant, but also because repotting in semi-hydroponics is really, really difficult. So this was outgrowing its old container when I potted up, and you can see here above the level the leca that is like caught between the roots. That's really hard to get out when you're repotting. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to just take this orchid and just pot it up. I wanted to be able to take it out of its previous container, which I believe was falling apart at the time, and then I just wanted to put it in another container that was larger. And so when I actually first repotted it, this has been in this cake container, I want to say about 3 years now, it was much smaller, and it was heavily, if anybody looked at it, over potted, because there's lots of space around it, but it's very slowly growing into it. And the trick with that, what I did, it was basically I did not want to disturb the root system. Now, the major deficit of semi-hydroponics, which you can really see here, is you can see the huge amount of algae growth I have going on in here. And the major problem with the algae growth is that eventually it clogs your holes and the pots stop draining. And when they stop draining, then you have the problem where there's too much water in there and the roots can't breathe and they suffocate and die. So, and also of course my pots collapse, and that's really painful when I have something large like this, and then, you know, I pick it up and all the plastic crumbles, and then I have to find a bigger pot for it. So here I have some orchids that are not doing well in semi-hydroponics. So one of the things that I've learned over the years is that semi-hydroponics works best if you have strong, vigorous plants going in. It's a really horrible system for trying to recover a sad, ill plant. Mostly because it is a little drier, and if you're not watering regularly, which I tend not to do, then stuff doesn't tend to establish, and like absolutely stuff that is not doing well, it goes into the winter and I forget to water, really suffers, and usually then it has a slow death over the summer. So you can see right here, this is a compact Cattleya that SL Dreamcatcher. I think I've had it. I think this was like a community pot that I divided up, and I put them all into semi-hydro, and a few of the big pieces are live, but you can see it's just not doing well. It's not really established. It's just dying very slowly because I don't water it enough. And you know, once something doesn't establish very well, it's just very hard to recover. If I really wanted to recover this, I should take it out of semi-hydro, and probably, for me in my growing environment, I would probably put it into very loosely packed sphagnum moss. And the reason it would be loosely packed is that I'd want the roots to be able to breathe, right? I don't want to suffocate them, and then the moss would keep the humidity up. So over here is my entire Tokyo Life collection. So Tokyo Life is a cross between Tokyo Magic and Circle of Life. And I bought a community pot, I want to say about 6-7 years ago, from H&R Nurseries. And then of course, experimentally, I put all of them into semi-hydro. And there were lots of plants. I think I had like 50 plants out of that community pot. And then I tried to grow them up to see how, you know, they would do. And I was really good, you know, I watered them a lot so they established, but you know, they're not, in 6 years, right, these guys should be blooming because they're also compacts, and they are not yet, right? So, you know, it's still a very hard way to establish seedlings, even if they do grow, right? It's just not, I mean, okay, I don't fertilize. You know, you're growing semi-hydroponically, there's very little nutrients there, so if you don't fertilize like I don't, then, you know, stuff malingers. Stuff takes a long time to establish, and it malingers. So that's why I think it works. But I mean, if you want to like be a fertilizing maniac, you can do that, but I don't have enough time, and I have too many orchids, and I basically do not fertilize. Like, I want to say never, but that's not true, because every now and then I feel super guilty, and I fertilize, but it comes out to being like once a year. So I have not fertilized yet in 2019, so all these guys are unfertilized right now, but I suspect by August I will feel super guilty and they'll all get a round of fertilizer. But don't hold me to that, because I haven't done it yet. So here is a standard Cattleya that's really not doing very well. This right here is my Hausermann's Firewing Villa Park. I can't remember if it was an emergency repot or not, meaning that, like, if you look at this pot right here, see, like, the UV light really destroys the plastic on these. These are parts that I got from First Rays, and I just don't think they hold up to UV very well. I think actually deli containers work much better. So, well, at least last longer. I mean, all plastic eventually suffers UVA damage. But anyways, I had to repot it. I remember, I think I repotted it very late in the summer last year. Like going into fall, I thought it was starting some new growth. It would have a good chance of establishing itself, but really it hasn't. You can see that, you know, it's sad, right? And I'm going to probably toss this, which I'm not going to. I like the flowers on this, but I'm not going to consider it real loss because I have way too many standard Cattleyas, and, you know, I guess death is a good reason to get rid of one and make a little bit more space. But you can also see down in here, right, there's a huge amount of algae growth going on. So even with these translucent containers that aren't completely clear, there's just a huge amount of algae growth. And I think that is one of the things I hate the most about semi-hydro. Is that, one, it's just really hard to transplant, like to pot up, right? I can't, it's very hard to divide. So if the stuff is doing really well, which this one isn't, this one could be divided because, right, the roots aren't holding very much of the media, right? So it's doing sucky, but of course it's gonna die because it's all shrivelly, right? And that's why it's not fully media. So basically it's easy to repot at a semi-hydro if stuff is dying and not doing well, but if it's doing really well, then it's really hard to repot. So maybe let me see if I can find one that has really good growth going on and just show how tightly the roots bind the clay pellets. All right, so here's an example of an orchid that's doing well. It's bursting out of its pot. You can see here it's cracked all the way down, right? It's wrapped itself around the pot, and I'm not going to be able to divide this when I have to pot it up. So let's see if I can show how solid it is. So here I'm picking it up with one hand. See, I can shake it up and down like this, and that means like the roots are just completely wrapped around the leafka in here. So like the top, it looks a little loose, but you know, like there's, see if I shake it on the side, nothing's coming out. That means everything is bound. All the clay pellets are bound by the roots. This one's like, if you look through the crack here, you see how those roots are wrapped around everything. It just makes it such a major pain in the butt to repot this. So let me see. I'm just breaking the pot now. But see that root right there? It's all covered in moss and algae, and it's just completely solid. See, I'm poking it, and you know, nothing's loose. You can't hear anything. Right, and this is what happens when stuff does really well. Cattleya roots like to wrap around stuff, and it just binds it up, and it's just like, basically it's turned it into like a large rock, right? The individual clay pellets are all bound together now, and this is going to be impossible to separate. And I'm not going to try unless I want to basically kill it. So here's a little orchid that is not really established, and I'm going to do the same pull test. So you see when I pull this one, see how everything bounces up and down? It's because it's not really bound to the pellets. It's not really well established right here, and you know, you can see that this orchid's suffering a little bit. So you can see that the leaf is a little wrinkly right here. You know, it looks sadder. It doesn't look like it's doing as well as that other one that I showed you. And so, you know, and see now it's wobbly in its pot because I pulled it. So I'm gonna have to like dump all the pellets out in my hand and then try to reseed it. But this is what happens when stuff basically doesn't establish well in semi-hydro. You know, it's weak. So that's why I say it's a hard system to establish into, and you want to start with really healthy plants rather than something that's struggling. So if you're trying to salvage an orchid, then I really don't recommend using semi-hydroponics as that method. My preferred method for doing salvage is using sphagnum moss. Alright, so here's that orchid that I was checking to see how well established it was, and it wasn't. So you can see it's growing. I mean, I'm not saying these things don't grow, but you know, it's not as vigorous as it could be. And that's why I say that semi-hydroponics is a hard system, but I have chosen it because I'm lazy. And so I think you can totally grow in this method, but you have to understand that there are limitations to it. It's not some kind of cure-all that some people like to call it. It's a growing system like anything else. But you know, Cattleyas, I mean, this is a hybrid. The Cattleyas in the wild, they're epiphytes that grow on trees. They don't really want to be in media. The semi-hydro attempts to deal with this by having, you know, these round pellets that provide aeration, but you know, it's also just not quite moist enough for them unless you're a frequent waterer. But it is, once those roots have grown down, like if you look right here, so once the roots actually do grow down into the water reservoir, then it's very healthy. Like this one is very well established. See, I'm lifting and I can't pull it out. And you can just see how the roots have really wrapped around, and this one's really happy. But you know, I can have orchids right next to each other that are happy, and you know, one can be happy and one can be really unhappy. So it really depends on the health of the plant going in. And once they're in, I could leave water at the bottom of this reservoir all the time and it would be fine. It would not rot because it's grown its, you know, water suited roots. But you can also see I've got the algae right here, and this one doesn't have it. But let me see if I can find a pot where the algae and moss has grown into the holes and clogged it up. Alright, so here's a pot where the algae's clogged the hole, and the way I look for these in my collection is you look up and you say, how well is this plant doing? And this one is doing super, super sad, and that means that it's not getting really good drainage, right? And so it's drowning just a little bit. Its upper roots that didn't grow down into the water have died because I missed the fact that algae is clogging this hole here, so it's not draining well. It's got some water down at the bottom here, and it's not breathing, right? The water's not pouring through. It's very algae filled, and you know, it's sad. The last thing I wanted to say is that I don't grow all my orchids in semi-hydroponics. I grow a lot of them. The majority, 95% of my Cattleyas are grown in semi-hydroponics, but like my Catasetum, like my Fred Codcar After Dark, it's grown in moss. I certainly do have, like this Aristocrat, I have ones in bark, right? Well, I don't know if you could call this still in bark as much as it's attached to a pot that used to have some bark in it. But I also grow some mounted. I only recently went into mounts. I started mounts about last year, the year before, so I'm like in my second year of mounts. I didn't want to go to mounts when I first started out because too much work. You have to water them a lot more often, but there are certain types of Cattleyas that just won't grow in a pot. Cattleya eclandiae is one of them. So this is an eclandiae that I got from Bill Rogerson last year, and it's doing fairly well, but it's mounted. And I have been unable to successfully grow eclandiae in any other format. It doesn't grow in moss, dies. It doesn't grow in bark, dies. It doesn't grow in semi-hydro, dies. So, you know, it's really important to grow your Cattleyas, or any of your orchids, in a format that they want to grow in, if you want to grow them. A lot of the orchids down here, a lot of the Cattleyas down here, I like Cattleyas in general, and I don't mind if some die in the process. And so these guys right here, I like them. I mean, I don't grow anything I hate, but I'm not super sad if they die. That they don't like semi-hydro and they just completely croak. So, you know, I grow them that way for ease, to make it easy on myself. And it can be done, but you know, there are of course drawbacks to growing this way.